Today I actually have the pleasure of introducing you to one of these professionals, Steve Bowden. Steve is a Vice President here at Peloton and leads our EPM and business intelligence practices. In addition to leading our core technology implementation practices, Steve manages a variety of client initiatives across the BI and EPM domains. Prior to joining Peloton as a founding member, Steve led large-scale BI initiatives across multiple business units and served in a variety of systems integration, data warehousing, and project management roles at very familiar companies such as Fidelity Investments and John Hancock. Steve has given a variety of presentations, including this one at events like Kscope, Collaborate, and various other user group, Oracle user group, and other events. So Steve, welcome to today's webinar.
Thanks,
Looking forward to a good session. Steve, today we're talking about data visualizations and also how those tie to OBIEE and how you can put those in practice. But before we dive into the tool section of our presentation, it would be great to give kind of an overview on why is data visualization so important in this day and age, kind of thinking outside of the bar chart, I guess.
Sure.
And you know, walk us through a bit of the background.
Great. I love to talk about this topic. I always get very positive feedback when we give this presentation. There's a certain aspect of empowering people and putting people on a path towards understanding that they weren't on before this presentation that I really enjoy about it. We kind of take on the topic of data visualization. One of the things that really sets the stage for this is that in this day and age, we're really fortunate to have at our disposal really powerful tools. So the average person in any office, in any company around the world has really powerful, really customizable tools at their disposal to create all kinds of visualizations to support whatever their needs. But along with those capabilities, there's a great responsibility in knowing how to use them well. And I think on this slide here, Tufte and Few really encapsulates that whole domain of concern around visual communication when he says that it's really only effective when it's aligned with the way people see and think. In order to work effectively, we must primarily understand people, not computers. It's very easy to get tangled up in all the customization and the creativity that the tools provide a platform for. And so the goals of this presentation are really to get people to step back away from the tools for a few minutes, hands off the keyboard, and think about what are you trying to accomplish with these tools. What's the outcome that we're trying to drive towards? And think about a little bit more effective and efficient way to get there. I like to frame this discussion around a few of the gurus in the space. So Tufte and Few is obviously a very recent one. Edward Tufte is also another one who has been in this space for a very long time. And when I present this to a live audience, I show a very short 2-minute video produced by PBS, which is called The Art of Data Visualization. And you get to hear Tufte in his own words talk about some of these concepts that he's really passionate about. I would encourage people to go out and take the 5 minutes to find it. I believe it's still out there on YouTube. Fantastic video. I've captured a few of the slides from that material that we're going to talk through to set the stage here. And I think it'll make for an insightful discussion as we transition into some of the tool specifics in the second half. Really at the heart of Tufte's approach to data visualization is this belief, this fundamental driving message around every single pixel should testify directly to content. So it really is the distillation of providing the data to people so that they can make their own informed judgments. And there are many things that come along with that. We talked about those tool-specific things that can sometimes get in the way. And then there are also the different lenses that authors bring to the table as they craft their visualizations. The video has a great quote here from Johnny Ive, who's chief design at Apple, and designer of the big products like the iPad and iPhone. And he says, we spend most of our time getting design out of the way so that we can really get at the essence and the core of what we're trying to communicate through our products to our customers. The video starts to transition into talking about the way that the brain has evolved over time. And from our most basic and primitive needs, our minds have evolved to identify risk and to make snap decisions based on patterns that we observe. There's a neat little clip in the video that shows patterns of grass waving, and the question is posed, is that just grass blowing in the wind, or is there a tiger coming to eat me? And so those capabilities that are embedded in the brain can be leveraged to make your data visualizations more impactful and more powerful. So acknowledging and having awareness of the patterns that the brain is trained to look for can enable you to get your message across a lot more clearly. The video shows many very beautiful, very simple and elegant visualization examples. I've picked just two of them that I think are exemplary of Tufte's approach. I mean, this first one here, what really strikes me when you look at it is that it needs no explanation. This comes up on the screen and you can instantly understand what it's trying to convey with just a title. The other thing that's really interesting to me here is what is not in this visualization. So we've got a pretty straightforward representation of flight patterns in what is obviously a representation of the United States. Mm-hmm. But what we don't have are detailed data points. We don't have any numbers. We don't even have geographic boundaries. There are no details or background colors. We've got a simple black background, and the data is presented. And the user can look at that and instantly know how to interpret it and make their own conclusions. So very powerful. There's another example here that I want to show, which is also from the video, that just plots out every McDonald's in the United States. It has a lot of similar characteristics in that you can look at it and you don't need to be told what to do.
These are quite interesting, Steve. I'll be sure to save the McDonald's one when I'm on the road next time. You know, one observation here, both of these are maps. Do you see an overall trend within some of the client projects we're working on where maps are being utilized more and more often?
Sure. I like the map examples because the map form is very recognizable and everybody can see those and understand them immediately. There are lots of other great examples in this video, but to your point, the capability to use maps in visualizations has evolved quite a bit over the past several years. OBIEE does have native capability to use maps and to plot out visualizations just like this. You could absolutely plot out this McDonald's representation in OBIEE. Whether you would be able to achieve this high plane of elegant presentation that Tufte puts forth is, you know, certainly a challenge that you could strive for, but the tools would definitely have those capabilities. Sort of winding the discussion around the video down, some parting words from Tufte in that video were that style and aesthetics cannot rescue failed content. So I think that's a really powerful statement. So all those years of experience that he has in creating very impactful visualization, that experience does not make bad content into good content. So you really need to have something worthwhile to start with before you start to try to communicate it to your users. Mm-hmm. And then sort of the last thing that he leaves with in the video is that we should seek to learn something and not to confirm something. And I think this is really a testament to some of the observations of bias that are implicit in many visualizations that people produce. People bring their own point of view. They selectively prune out pieces of information that do not confirm the message that they're trying to convey. And so Tufte's message is really make the data clear to people in a consumable fashion that is very simple and allow people to make their own judgments. Mm-hmm. So those are really some of the driving characteristics that we want to incorporate into the tools that we use to achieve our business outcomes. So transitioning out of the video world and into some more of the academic content that Tufte has put out there over the last couple decades, at the core of Tufte's approach to producing data visualization is this concept of chart junk. And I think we can all, once we hear what this is, think in our minds of examples where we've seen this. I'm going to show a few of these examples. They tend to generate a laugh or two, and it's amazing that people would do some of the things that Tufte categorizes as chart junk. But essentially, chart junk are elements that don't contribute to better understanding, and even worse, they sometimes distract from understanding of the content. So what are some of those things? First off, excessive ornamentation. I mean, you think about all those capabilities that you have in tools like PowerPoint and Excel, and many of the other common tools out there will allow you to do all kinds of 3D, bright colors. A lot of the things on this list here that really don't help to convey your message. They allow you to feel like you've produced something pretty creative and pretty interesting, but they don't overall contribute to communicating your message. Extraneous text that doesn't need to be there, that doesn't help to communicate the message, is a pretty common area where people go off the rails. And then, this last one here at the bottom, the arbitrary grouping and scaling of values. There's a great example of that I'm going to show here, where in order for people to understand what you're trying to communicate, you've got to tap into the patterns of the way that they expect to consume the information. And if you've got some really unusual scaling or grouping, people won't be able to naturally see it and understand it.
Mm-hmm. There was an interesting article in the Harvard Business Review just recently that tried to counter some of Tufte's points here, where they had done a study that said that charts, graphs, images that actually included a lot of these elements were more memorable than the ones that didn't. So there's a whole article talking about how these graphs and images are more memorable, trying to counter some of these points, and then the last paragraph in the article said exactly that. They may have been more memorable, but people tended not to be able to explain what exactly the graph was trying to bring across, which, in a business context, we're not trying to create memorable pictures. We're trying to get a business message and a story across. So this resonates quite well.
Yeah, that's a great point and a perfect example of what Tufte is trying to communicate here. So now to a couple of fun examples here. People love this stuff. Some chart junk. This first one here I like to present is very well-known classic example of chart junk. It actually has a name. This one's called the March of the Pies. And the reason why it's such a great example is because it has very little information that's actually presented in this slide, but it is really mind-bogglingly complex to understand what we're actually trying to communicate. If you look at what we've got, it's a relatively dark presentation in terms of the color tones, and some of the shading seems to be extraneous, and then we've got this series of pies. And just looking at it, the trajectory of the pies would seem to be trying to tell me something. In the back of my mind, I'm seeing a trend of pies going upwards. Mm-hmm. But when I look at the values in the pies, they don't really follow that pattern at all. And so I'm left having to stop and look at every single one of the pies and think, what exactly is this telling me? And you could stare at this for several minutes and not really understand what the author is trying to communicate. Mm-hmm. So this is the exact antithesis of what you would want to do in terms of following Tufte's approach. Mm. This next one is a little bit more insidious because it doesn't look that bad upon first looking at it. So what this chart is essentially trying to communicate is what percentage of share of GDP does each country spend on health expenditures? Relatively straightforward question. And you can see country names that you recognize, and you can see a scale on the left that is a percentage of GDP. So up to that point, we're doing okay. And then you start to actually want to analyze this information. And it's not intuitive how this data is grouped. So we get back to Tufte's concept of arbitrary grouping, trying to compare countries like Denmark with some of its nearby neighbors, with Norway or other, I just can't do it. And what becomes glaringly obvious is that we're missing something down here. We're missing an axis. And why are we missing it? Because if the axis was there, what you would see on the axis is actually the alphabet. which is totally ridiculous. As you can see, we're just sorted alphabetically from left to right. Totally arbitrary presentation. So it doesn't really lend itself to any sort of valuable analytic meaning.
That's a very interesting example.
So a more effective way to present a ranking of that type of information, albeit with a different set of data, this is using Oracle sample data, would be to, this would be very much a Tufte or a Tufte and Few approach, would be to stack them with horizontal bars and rank them from top to bottom. And then you can very clearly see how each of these values, each of these groups rate against each other. Another concept that applies in the background, as we saw with some of those map presentations from the earlier slides, is this concept of data to ink. How much information are we trying to communicate versus how much ink is on the page? This next slide that I'm going to show you is an extreme example of way too much ink for way too little information, and it's exactly the type of problem that Tufte is trying to highlight that commonly exists. Now, this one really stands out, worthy of a blue ribbon. Tufte labeled this back in 1983, which recognized a long time ago as the worst graphic ever to find its way into print. And although we've definitely had a lot happen in the last, 30-ish years, I think this one would still hold its weight against some of those more recent examples. So we've got to spend a few moments here and just look at what the heck is this thing trying to do. So essentially what this graph, I recognize it's a little hard to read, but what it's trying to do is talk about what are the average ages of people enrolled in college over a set of 5 years. So, for example, in 1973, this chart here is telling me that the average age of college enrollees is something around 29.2. Okay, so I can follow this line with that basic understanding. We've got some pretty interesting color choices here, some very old school 3D effects, which add a lot of drama here. And then I noticed there's this crinkly line here that's kind of modifying the scale here to bring our point of 28 years old down to the root of our axis here. And then as I follow it up here, I've got this other crinkle in the scale, and then I've got this whole other big thing hanging up in the air up here. And the question is, what is this? After spending a considerable amount of time analyzing this, Tufte figured out that what the author of this chart did was actually tell us not only what is the enrolled average age in these years, but the inverse of each of those. So for example, if the average age was 30, the inverse of 70 would be mapped up here for no apparent reason whatsoever, providing little value at all, and hence the need to have this break in the scale so that we could get this onto a page. Otherwise, we would have a gap between 34 and the inverse of all of those numbers. So this is just a real crazy example of data visualization gone bad. Just to add insult to injury, Tufte presented this the way that he would have presented the same information, which is this here in the bottom right corner. Very simple, obviously very consistent with some of the other themes we talked about, the data to ink ratio, keeping things as simple as possible.
This is a great overview, Steve, and clearly getting the point across that says, hey, if you have the tools, you have the capabilities to create interesting charts and tell a story, you really have to pay close attention to how you communicate your message, what story you're baking into the graph, and keep that data to ink ratio into account. Now, this is all great theory, great academic background. Transitioning this into the OBIEE world, what are we looking at here? What are some of the new capabilities, and what are some of the do's and don'ts that you have come across in recent implementations? Sure.
So we'll step back from the academic for a few moments and now talk about the tools at hand. So obviously, we're an Oracle Platinum partner, and we do a lot of OBIEE work with our clients, and so we're very familiar with a lot of the core capabilities and the new things that are out there that come our way pretty regular basis. So I put up here just some of the background of some of the basic blocking and tackling capabilities that every tool out there has that you would expect to see in a reporting and analysis tool. So your standard bar, line, and area charts are represented here, and some descriptions and a link here back to the documentation where you can read more about this if you'd like. But you start to see that there's already a little bit of an inkling of, hey, there may be trouble ahead, where you start to see all these different styles that are out here with triangle, cylinder, diamond, gradient, and pattern fill styles. So, you know, there's caution here. Although we have these basic capabilities, there is definitely the opportunity to go off the rails. And so the next couple of slides, I'm going to focus more on some of the newer capabilities in the latest versions of OBIEE. So for those of you who've had the opportunity to maybe try out OBIEE on your laptop or connect to a demo environment, and you'll be familiar with a few of these visuals. This is the sample light database that I'm using here that you get right from Oracle. Right when you fire the thing up and you log in for the first time, you'll be staring right at the first type of new capability, which is these performance tiles. These are pretty cool, very simple in what they're trying to do. They're basically focused on a single measure, and they present the information in really an infographic type of a way. And you know, you can get somewhat creative with these. There's the ability to apply conditional formatting to them. I've seen people organize clusters of these things and create a little bit of a heat map of KPIs. So there's some really cool things you can do. I had a caveat here for those of you who go and try to play around with this. You really got to be careful about how you implement them, though, because, as I said, we're focused on one measure. But if you're not careful about your filters, you may be sending an incorrect message here. You see this example where multiple years be hiding behind an aggregated measure, and it wouldn't really be apparent to the consumer of that information unless you somehow indicated that. Mm-hmm. So interesting stuff, very simple in concept and very easy to try out. Next capability, the waterfall chart, is also new in 11.117. So the waterfall chart essentially communicates the composition of a subtotal measure and the contribution of all the pieces to it. So in this example, we've got a total bar in blue on the right, and what we are looking at is the contribution of various offices to that total. So to the far left, the ones that have the largest contribution, the Perry office and the Talaro office, have larger blocks, and they stack up to the peak of the smallest positive contributor. And then we have the negative contributors, which are shown in red, and that gets us to our total.
This is an interesting chart, Steve, and could potentially have some misleading conclusions to it. Like, for example, the Merrimon office, you know, even though it's highlighted at the top of the 2000K point there, you know, they're not exactly the largest contributors either. So again, proceed with caution, I guess, here. But, you know, in terms of graphs like these, how practical are these? Are these being used in implementations? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, so these are very new, and I think that's an absolutely valid question. We've started to prototype a few of these where our clients are interested in trying some new things. But I agree, this one has the potential to confuse if not used in the right way. There's sort of an implied order ranking just based on size, and to your point around the one that has a 0 value is kind of floating there in the middle. I think the jury is still out on how impactful this one will be. If I could go back a slide, I think these performance tiles are an example of something that will be obviously very useful, and we're already starting to see many of our clients use these, where this one I think is a little bit more experimental.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I'm going to proceed ahead with another type of a graph, which is this stacked graph and the 100% stacked graph. And initially I looked at these and didn't really think too much of them. And then if you think about this one, perhaps in the context of that March of the Pies example back a few slides back, this would actually be a much more effective way to show proportional change of a mix over time. What this does is it caps the chart at 100%, and it will be able to show you the change in composition of that 100% over time. So I think as people start to understand how this is used, this has a lot of potential in terms of its usefulness. Trellis charts have been updated in 11.117. These things are pretty cool. For those who have never seen them before, essentially what a trellis chart does is take a visualization of a couple of data series, and it can be a bar and a line, or a pair of lines, bubbles. There are many different ways that you can present the information. It takes that basic framework of a relationship of some key metrics and some key categories or dimensions, and it expands them out to a matrix of combinations of other relevant domain values. So here, the designer of this presentation, this Trellis chart, has decided that unit price and revenue shown on a time series here is a valuable way to look at the information. And they've expanded this out across companies in the office hierarchy, as well as product groups across the columns in their product dimension. So very quickly you can look at this and start to get a sense of what combinations of those dimensions are trending based on the performance that is observed in the data. There's also a subcategory of trellis charts, which are these little micro charts over here to the right, which even further simplify down to maybe less of a matrix of other dimensions, but within a dimension to be able to see specific metrics, and there's these spark lines or these micro bar charts that allow you to very easily observe a trend without having to do a lot of thinking. You basically are presented with something that's highly recognizable in an easily consumable way. Sort of indirectly related to data visualization are some of the capabilities that set the context for what we see in a dashboard or in an OBIEE report. Null suppression is a new capability in 11.117, where we have the ability to set suppress nulls at both the analysis or the view level. So, this obviously for people who come from an S-based background who are used to having that capability in SmartView or the Excel add-in, this will resonate with those types of people who want to be able to control whether or not a row appears or not based on the value, the data that resides behind it. So this puts some more power into the hands of the users. And just from a very general perspective, one of the things that I first noticed when I logged into 11.117 is it just felt fresh. It had the performance tiles there, but there was something else there that I couldn't immediately put my finger on. And then when I dug around a little bit deeper, I discovered that Oracle has changed the default style for the presentation of dashboard and analysis content. So the new style is called Fusion FX, and you'll notice it's a bit brighter. It has like a subliminal higher energy feel. The edges are rounded, so it kind of loses a little bit of that 90s aesthetic, and there's less gradient in the toolbars, a little bit more shadowing around the boxes. It just feels a little bit more refined.
Now it's amazing what a little bit of a color change, a little bit of a shadow does to the appeal of graphs, images, and information.
A really cool new feature that I think will help people to make smart decisions around how they build visualizations is this new recommendation sort of wizard that is called Best Visualization. Basically what this enables us to do, we're going to try this in just a moment, is to select a group of columns that have the information that somebody wants to see, and then you can have OBIEE suggest a visualization, and it can do that based on a couple of different algorithms. So it can just generally make a recommendation based on the nature of the columns that are requested, but you can also fine-tune those recommendations by providing some hints to the tool to say, I'm interested in analyzing trends or comparing values, and it will help Oracle, help OBIEE give you the recommendation that you're looking for. So this is cool. We're going to try this out in just a few minutes. This one's really simple, and I think it falls into a bucket of enhancements that are in this release that I just call sort of the make people happy enhancements. This is a really simple one. A lot of times the dashboard will have pieces of the message that are more detailed, and then some things that you would rather have be more high level and fixed. And until this release, if you had more than a screen's worth of real estate, you had to scroll the whole thing. Well, in 11.117, you have the ability to freeze the left outermost column in your dashboard so that the right side of your screen can scroll. So if you have some key metrics that you don't want to move, or you want to put, a great use of this is to have your prompts in that locked frozen column, and then have columns to the right of that that change more dynamically, that are scrollable. It just makes for a little bit more friendly interface.
Mm-hmm. So Steve, I know we want to take this beyond PowerPoint and actually into the wonderful world of a couple of live demonstrations here. So hopefully the internet and web gods are with us and will allow us to actually show some of these things in action here.
Okay, it looks like the gods are going to cooperate. Got a thumbs up. You can see my my dashboard here. So what I'd like to do is to show a couple of examples of things that are in OBIEE 11.117. So there are three basic areas that I'd like to get into. I want to show a little bit more detail into these performance tiles because I think they're going to start to show up a lot more on dashboards as people get into the new release. I'm going to show that best visualization recommendation wizard. And then I am also going to show how we achieve really a Tufte-esque view of a rank that I showed earlier in that example where we were looking at countries and their spending on health. That's an area, those rank charts, that I find that people struggle with a lot in getting them right. They'll get almost there, but they don't get the sorting right, or there's just a piece of it that's missing. So I'm going to walk through click by click and show you how you do it. So with that, I'm going to jump right into this this discussion here around the performance tiles. So this is right out of the box, sample light. We've got three different performance tiles. I want to show that these are all linked in here to my prompts. So as I make selections here in my prompts, it's going to change the values. I want to click a couple of these because I want to show, we're noticing this is green, and then I think, let me try a different combination here. I think if I turn 2008 and 9 off, oh, we got some yellow. So I wanted to demonstrate that these performance tiles have got some logic built into them to help us to draw our attention to things that are meaningful. A little peek behind the scenes, behind the curtain of how these things are configured. If I go into Edit Dashboard, I'm going to look at this this analysis that makes up those tiles, and I can see I've got the representation of these three tiles. And we'll just take a look at what that conditional formatting looks like. If I go and click Edit, and I'm going to look at the properties of the performance tile, and I can see, the elegance of these visualizations really comes from the limits that are on them. You can't do a ton with them. You can't change the shapes. You've basically got 5 of these styles that are shown down here. So it keeps things very simple. The conditional formatting is probably the most complicated thing that you can do with it. So if I click on this link, I can see that out of the box, somebody has coded up some rules to say that if this metric is less than 4, it's green. If it's between 4 and 6, it's yellow. If it's greater than 6, it's red. So that logic is embedded into this tile, and these are all coded to respond to prompts. So when I look at them back on my dashboard, I'm able to achieve this desired result. So again, these are really simple but pretty cool, and I think there's a lot more to come. I wouldn't be surprised if future releases maybe diluted a little bit of that elegance of simplicity and added some new tricks and features to these things, but I think if you use them for that intended purpose of keeping things simple, they're very powerful, and they're very consistent with the theme of how Tufte would approach visualization.
I know we've used these effectively at a recent client where, interesting, I mean, we were mapping out all kinds of different dashboards, different graphs, and the common theme across the executive team was, just one statistics, how many people are working in our company today? And as the company had grown and expanded, nationally and internationally, just a simple question of how many people work within our corporation was kind of a key critical question that if you ask 10 people in the room, you got 10 different answers. I know we've used the tile very effectively, so when they log in, that's the first number they see. How many people are working in our corporation today?
Yep, that's a great use case. Okay, so now I want to transition into demonstrating that recommended visualization capability. What I'm going to do in order to show that is start a brand new analysis, clicking on New Analysis, and the subject area I'm interested in. This is the out-of-the-box sample sales light. You can see the familiar OBIEE interface looks the same in 11.1.17. From my time dimension, I'm going to select years and months. I'm going to select product types, and I'm going to select revenue as my measure. And just for keeping it simple, I'm going to filter down to 1 year. I'm going to set a filter for only 2010. So you can see with 10 seconds of clicks, I've got a pretty basic analysis here. I'm going to click on the Results tab, and I'm going to get some results. So the default view here is a table, and so you can see I've got year, month, my product categories, and the revenue, and it's just a long list. It's something that you could do in Excel. What I'd like to have OBIEE do is tell me, hey, how would I make the most effective use of this information? So what I'm going to do is click on this in this Views corner of our View dialog, the Results dialog here. I now have a couple of new entries that weren't in the previous release. So I can click on Best Visualization, which basically says, just tell me what the best way to do it would be based on the data, and then I can steer it in a direction if I want to. I'm just going to use the Best Visualization. Click on that, wait a second, and okay, so let me just scroll some of these things out of the way. So based on the information that we selected, which was a series of products, a time series, and a single metric over time, OBIEE interpreted that request and suggested that this line chart would be the most effective visualization. And although this one is a little busy, it's a good starting point. I think this is a good suggestion that makes sense. And so from this launching point, we can then do many things to make it more consistent with the way that Few and Tufte would implement a request. And I'm going to show a few of those things as we transition into the last example. But I think this is going to help people quite a bit. Just the initial setup of some of these charts can be a little bit unintuitive for people just getting started with OBIEE. Here, as long as you kind of understand the columns that you need, you click a button and it gets you 80% of the way there, and it's up to you to tweak it to your liking here. We can click Done, and then I'll add that to my compound layout, and we'll get rid of the grid. And one thing I always like to encourage people to do to get in a good habit of, there's a standard view that is available on every single dashboard which shows your filters. And I think this is consistent with Tufte's idea of just show the data and don't overly edit it. Don't provide filters that are not visible to your information consumer. So if I add another view, there's a standard view called the Filters view. I'm going to click on that. I'm just going to leave it as is. Just click Done, no changes whatsoever, and then add the Filters view to my compound layout. stick it right underneath there. And now I can see the results, and I can also see what filter was applied to create this chart. So I think that's the best practice. Obviously, there's a ton of formatting you can do around this, but the basic concept is pretty universal. So that is the best visualization capability. The next thing I want to show is how we would produce that rank chart, which I think many people struggle with. So again, I'm going to go and select a new analysis, also from that same subject area. We're going to leave this one behind. We don't need it anymore. And I'm going to make similar selections to what I had made just a few minutes ago. I'm going to select a year. Within the products group, I'm going to select products because I want to get at that product level of detail. Really, the question that I'm going to try to answer is, tell me how sales of specific products rank in a given year. And so that's the business question that I'm going to try to address. So I've got years, I've got products, I'm going to add a company here as well. So from the offices dimension, we've got a company field. And then I'm going to choose a fact, which is the revenue. Again, just to keep the scope of this thing down, I'm going to filter this on a specific year. I'm going to select 2010. Really, it performs fine with all the years. It just keeps things simpler here for the purposes of demonstration. We're going to select a specific company as well. We'll select, I think there are 3 companies in this demo. We'll select the first one. Okay, so pretty simple request. Took less than a minute to put together. And what does this look like? Okay, we've got a grid, and it shows me for 2010. And this is pretty simple. You could use the native capabilities and just sort this and use this as a grid, but we're talking about data visualization, so we want to talk about how we might make this a little bit more interesting than a grid. I'm going to create a new view, which is going to be a graph using a bar, and I'm going to do a horizontal bar. Okay, and you'll notice right away that does not look like a rank to me. So what we've got to do is we've got to tell OBIEE what the relationships are between the different data elements that we selected. So down below here in the layout, I'll make this a little bigger so it's a little bit more visible. We've already selected our company, so I don't really need the company to be the bar. I'm going to park that in this excluded parking lot. What I really want to show in the bar are the products. So I'm going to drop the products over there. And now I've got something that kind of looks like where I want to go. Let me just minimize this a bit. You can see I've got products and I've got my revenue, but just keeping with that Tufte theme here, there's some extraneous stuff that just doesn't need to be here. I'm only looking at 1 year and 1 measure, so do I really need a legend? And there's just some things we could do to simplify this. It may be a little difficult to see, but we've still got some of this 3D bar shading that Tufte would definitely not approve of. So we're going to make a few more subtle tweaks here to get more in line with some of those visualization best practices, removing some of that ornamentation. So
I take it one of your recommendations is not ordering the products in alphabetical order.
Bingo. So what we're going to do first is take a few of these elements out. And so this, I encourage people to go in and play around with the graph properties. Make a change, click OK, and see what it does. You'll learn some interesting things here. So right off in this graph properties dialog box, I've got 4 tabs of things that I can change. First thing, I'm going to turn the legend off because I don't need it. I'm going to switch over to this Style tab. And this drop-down box here is, it correlates to that grid I showed a few slides ago, the different ways you can represent those horizontal data series here. By default, the simplest is just a rectangle. It doesn't have any sort of pretending to be a cylinder or any unusual shading of the sun, or it's just a straight, flat box. I mean, if you think iOS 7, big shift to everything being flat, upcoming Android KitKat, the world is going flat. You can go flat in your graphs with the rectangle style. We're going to turn off these grid lines. These visible vertical grid lines here in the back. We don't really need those so much. The other thing I'm going to do is switch over to this titles and labels area. So I've got revenue down below and I've got revenue up above. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the revenue title up at the top because I just don't need it. I know that these are products over here, so I don't need something to tell me that those are products. I'm going to get rid of that too. The last thing I'm going to do, this is a very big sort of Tufte thing, is to show the values of the data. So right now, by default, everything's coded to only show me what the value is when I mouse over it with my pointer. I'm going to tell OBIEE to always show me the values. So we'll do that, and then since I'm going to have the value of each one of these bars right after the bars, I'm going to go ahead and go to the extreme and actually eliminate these values from the horizontal axis. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. We've made a whole series of changes here. And what we get is something that looks very iOS 7 Apple-y, kind of flat. Notice no interesting shading. We got rid of those values down here because we don't need them. We have them up here. But we're still not in the right order. We're close. But if I wanted to analyze this one against this one, it's not really laid out in the most ideal way. So I'm going to click Done here. I'm going to add that graph to my compound layout. And the last thing I'm going to do is go back to my criteria and tell this column to be sorted in descending order. And this is one of the quirks of this tool, is that if you have anything in certain parts of the definition of this chart, it won't sort properly. So what we need to do is get the year label out of here. As soon as we drop this out, it will sort properly. Click Done, and there we go. So now we've got that simple stacked horizontal bar that anybody can instantly look at and know how your product sales stack up. So that concludes the demo portion here of the presentation. I want to take it back over to the slides.
All right, Steve, that was a great overview. So it sounds like flat is the new black when it comes to tables and presentations. Something to get used to.
Absolutely.
So we're at the end of the structured presentation, if you will. Now I would like to jump into the Q&A session. We have about 10 minutes left here. Yeah, we've looked at more like a desktop type solution here, a desktop view of data and presentation. A lot of our initiatives have mobile involved in a heavy fashion. How, if to what extent, if any, would you look at this differently when it pertains to mobile?
Sure, I think that's a great question. For those of you on the phone who don't know this, the OBIEE suite of tools includes now a mobile application. It's been out there for a while. We've been involved with Oracle since the very inception of that tool. We've been talking about it on the conference circuit now, I think, about 2 years. And what that enables us to do is to access content that was built for the desktop without really making any other changes. You don't need to go design mobile-specific content. In the early days of that application, which if you have iOS, you could go download it from the App Store, enter in a few server connection parameters, and you're off and running. It was very simple, but it didn't have everything up at the beginning. There were some technology limitations around Flash and other just sort of structural issues that prevented people from adopting it in the early days. Those are largely gone, and now you can reasonably expect to use content that's on a OBIEE dashboard on a mobile device. As we've attended some of the conferences this year, we continue to hear from Oracle. The future is more universal in terms of HTML5 and less maybe perhaps around apps that are specific to a certain platform. So I think this is going to continue to evolve, but the capability is there. Just for those on the phone who are interested, we were involved in helping Oracle to define an approach for our clients who happen to have very high security requirements for mobile devices, and played a little bit of a role in defining the mobile security toolkit. We have a lot of intellectual capital to share on that topic, so if you have those types of circumstances, we would love to talk to you about them.
Yep, absolutely. Another question here, in terms of the demonstration we walked through, the question was, was this on an Oracle, done on an Oracle platform, an Oracle type demo environment? And the answer there actually is that this demonstration was done in our own Peloton Performance Center on our Exalytics environment. So that's an environment that we use very aggressively and actively in our client implementations to help them visualize, help them walk through different scenarios. So that's an environment we have immediate access to, and can assist and help clients with. Anything to add there, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, we were one of the, I think, in the first group of partners in the country to get an Exalytics box, and we've used it for a lot of creative things, both on the EPM and the BI side. We've done some benchmarking around S-based and planning tuning. Obviously, OBIEE runs extremely well, and the times 10 engine even adds to some of the benefits you get from that. So Exalytics is definitely providing some lift to us and to our clients.
Absolutely. Another question here is, some of these capabilities, you alluded that they have been made available in the latest release. Are some of these capabilities available in older versions as well? Can you kind of give an overview on that?
Pretty much everything that I showed in the more detailed slide walkthroughs is new OBIEE 11.117 capability. So the only thing that really kind of existed a little bit before that were some of those Trellis charts, but they're enhanced significantly in the new release. And some of the mobile capabilities have been around for a little bit, but the newest version is a big upgrade. And so while there are some of those pieces that are out there, things like the performance tiles, the waterfall, freeze panes, null suppression, those are all new 11.117 features.
Great. Thank you. A couple questions from the audience here. Have you seen any improvements in copying formatting from one column to another column in the same analysis set?
The capability to do that is there, and it's pretty functional, has been for a while. So I think if you have some specific questions, please feel free. I'd be happy to have a conversation after the meeting to be able to get into some of the technical details of that, but it's something that we don't struggle to do, so we'd like to help you figure that one out.
Yeah, that's absolutely one we could take offline and talk through in more detail. Another question here, what are your thoughts on leveraging SmartView to consume OBIEE content?
That is a great question. So obviously, SmartView has become even more of a focus for Oracle in terms of a front-end tool, now having the ability for HFM and OBIEE and S-Base and planning. All these tools now have that capability to connect, and people, just face it, they like to be in Excel. So I think having the ability to push out your content directly to Excel is a huge potential adder of value in terms of you don't have to build your reports multiple times. So if you've got some content that you've already built in OBIEE, or if you're thinking about what's the best way to make something reusable, you can put it into an OBIEE model, your data, and then you can build some reports, and then you can push them out to people who want to consume them in a dashboard paradigm, or you can push them out directly to Excel, and you can also push them out to a mobile device. So really, I mean, starting in OBIEE really makes a lot of sense from a reuse and a leverage capability perspective.
That's great insight. We're at the top of the hour here. This was a very productive session. I hope everyone got a lot of information out of this, like we alluded to before. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either Steve, or you can send your questions to insights@pelotongroup.com. This will conclude the recording of this webinar. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. With that, greatly appreciate all of your attendance. Steve, greatly appreciate going through the last hour on this information, and looking forward to the next one. Have a great day.